Gerard, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having us.
So I'm looking forward to this because we are going to be talking about something that's very dear to my heart today. Obviously, we're talking about social media. But before we get started with that, can you tell everyone a little bit about who you are, what you currently do, and maybe a little bit about your journey and how you got here?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Gerard Murnaghan. I'm the VP and GM for Sprout Social internationally, which basically means I get to, the privilege of running our business outside of North America. So been with Sprout 3.5 years. It's my first stint in the world of social. Before Sprout, I worked within HR tech with Indeed.com. And then before that, spent a whole bunch of years with different corporate high-tech companies, Apple, Oracle, Dell, EMC, and so on. So, it's my first stint in the world of social, but certainly, not new to me as a consumer and as a buyer. Um, it's one of those things where getting the opportunity to be part of conversation that affects all industries, all companies of all sizes, it's really exciting to be able to be part of that business. And just to see the change in attitude towards social over the last few years is quite enlightening. Even in the last 3 years with Sprout, you see a big difference between conversations in our first year versus conversations now, and I'm sure in the next 2 years it'll change again. When I'm not working, I'm pretty much, the dad of a 6-year-old son and a 14-year-old daughter, and so they keep me active and young at heart. And so, unfortunately, the two of them don't like the same movies or like the same things, so I have to try and divide my time between, Disney movies and Ninjago, and then divide time into, you know, video editing and the world of TikTok with my daughter. So it's a nice balance.
I'm guessing you're awesome at the bottle flip challenge then.
I've tried, and I'm good at a floss. So I do a mean floss, but that's kind of where it ends. When my daughter starts to face palm with embarrassment, I know my job is done,
Perfect. That's when you know you can just moonwalk out the room, giving it
Yeah,
the guns, and then that's it. Well, that sounds
exactly.
fantastic. I tell you what, though, that's got to keep your finger on the pulse in terms of what the cool kids are doing, as opposed to maybe our age group now.
I mean, it's scary in some ways because they're so switched on and they're so in tune with all the tools. And even just watching the behavior and the way they interact, with the different networks. And it's funny even thinking about the fact that they now see their Instagram profile almost being kind of the parent facing digital view of them. And now they're starting to take to these other shadowy tools to be able to converse and collaborate without the parents' knowledge. So it's trying to keep an eye on things and make sure there's no
We're
shadow work going on.
we're starting to sound old now. It's like that when the Instagram is like the parent-facing version and the shadowy tools of what is social media.
Yeah.
But you are completely right, and I've had this conversation with quite a few friends saying, excuse me, I'm so grateful for sort of my university age group, that kind of days of 18 to 23, uh, whereby basically mobile phones started to have cameras. But they're so bad that if you open those images now, unless you were there and you remember the moment, you can't tell who's in that photo or who was doing what. And I'm really happy about that, as opposed to every one of my classmates or friends having a 4K camera in their pocket right now.
Yeah, it definitely. I think there's that bit of plausible deniability and, being able to let the past be the past. There's some beauty in that too, I think, right?
Definitely. So anyway, but that's not what we're here to talk about today, although we are going to carry on about social media. Social
Yeah,
media for me is a huge tool. I've always said that as an agency, that's where we focus most of our time, content creation for clients. And we've worked a little bit in businesses all over. One of the key things, obviously, has been this last couple of years, last year in particular, being a little bit of a strange one. But it's really forced the non believers, let's call them, or the people that maybe were adverse to coming online to actually have to do something, to actually have to be able to connect, to really get involved with their communities. What are some of the trends that you guys saw from like last year mainly, but where people have had to really kind of change?
yeah. I mean, listen, the last year, 18 months, they've just been such a challenge in so many ways. So it's kind of so many things happened, and there was so much acceleration in our space. We're probably boiling down 5 years of maturity into 18 months, right? But I think before COVID, there was probably kind of three conversations happening around social. The first conversation was brands and organizations trying to get their head around, how do we make social a part of our communication channel? So how does social sit next to email, next to telephone, and how do we leverage that? Then the second conversation was around how does social media management and tools like Sprout, how do they sit as part of our record within our system? You know, how does it sit next to our CRM, next to our help desk, next to our MarTech stack? And then there was a conversation around business intelligence and social data. How can we use social intelligence to inform market research, inform our brand health, inform our competitive insights? And so these were conversations that were happening pre-COVID, and they were happening with different size organizations and different levels of, I suppose, maturity curve. And then when COVID hit, a lot of companies and organizations were then put into this kind of crisis mode of, okay, how do we pivot our business? How do we now react to what could become in some cases either a flood of opinion or a flood of questions or a flood of customers looking for help, versus how do we then try and build a business? So as those conversations took place, there were some industries that were like, we're in a cost saving mode, we can't even begin to unpack this. Others then were like, okay, we're in pivot situation. Now we got to try and figure out how do we cover the gaps. So we look at something like travel and tourism, say, for instance, we have a customer, large customer of TUI Travel. And for example, they came to us at a time right in the middle of this where they were getting 500,000 messages every 90 days, right? Like they were just inundated. You could imagine people trying to change flights, change cruise holidays, booking, rebooking. What's my, remind me of my T's and C's. How do I change my holiday plans to next year? What does it mean for insurance in terms of insurance claims, etc.? So they were absolutely flooded with just messages from their customer base. And so they used Sprout in that case because we have a part of our tool called Smart Inbox, where you can basically have all those messages coming from your Facebook, from your LinkedIn, from Twitter, from Insta into one place. They were able to get their help desk then to really focus in on how do we streamline, satisfy the customer's need, and then delight them so that we can try and retain their business, post-pandemic. And so that was an example of where just, we're in the thick of it, help us out. So that was definitely something that we saw from a number of travel and tourism brands over the year. We then saw this really interesting shift then with retailers, where we had retailers who had a kind of a soft online presence, didn't quite deal with Facebook shops or Shopify or have the full checkout experience. They were forced to take what was simply just, here's a product or service, now contact our sales team over the telephone, and make it into like a 3-click checkout. So they had to re-engineer their plumbing and really understand what it means to shop online and get that full satisfaction from end to end. And it was really interesting watching their journey in terms of trying to cope with that. And we saw it from everything from small local retailers to big retailers, niche product providers. We saw it from off licenses to sports brands, even gymnasiums. Like we saw gyms who weren't open pivoting to online subscription models where they could then try and do in-home workouts. So all that stuff was happening right in the middle of this. And so I think those businesses that moved quickly and acted first kind of adopted the wave. And then about 8 months in, by the time we were kind of in that second lockdown phase, we saw then those businesses who were kind of on defense thinking, let's wait and see. And before we make any decisions, then they kind of came towards the back end of last year. So we saw a second surge of customers looking for help. And so kind of that's kind of some of the examples that I saw over the last kind of 12 to 18 months here.
It's incredible, isn't it, though, to think that this really forced a lot of people's hands to having to think outside their usual box. And I think that there was a lot of reticence by companies, that had done fine up until that point, until, you no longer have a physical premises that's open, or if you're a gym, until you can no longer have people coming in to work out at your gym. And that's the parts when you suddenly go like, wow, crap, we've got to move, we've got to shift, right? And at that point, once you've made the shift, though, and you start to see the potential of the results, and I'm not saying it's a shift that's going to happen forever, right? We like going to the gym because there's a kind of social and also a beneficial part to being out of your house and doing it somewhere else. But I definitely realize that now when I'm talking to business owners and especially companies that did make that transition, They don't want to get rid of that transition. They want to welcome people back into the retail experience, but they also want to make sure that they keep smashing the online stuff at the same time, because it's such a big revenue generator potentially. And it comes with very little overhead or cost compared to opening stores or branching out and opening a second store.
Yeah, big time. I mean, like as a consumer myself, the days of going into shops and browsing for hours on end, like, it's just not there. I haven't got time for it. And even if I did, I probably wouldn't choose to do that anymore. I know the brands that I want to shop from. I know how to access them online easily. I know I have my autofill information already stored. I can do my 3 clicks. I know my size. I know what fits. And I'm happy with that. And I have my delivery service pretty much in check. So that idea of, meeting the customer where they want to be met, and the brands that I buy from know my taste. They know how I want to be satisfied, and they meet me where I want to be met. And so I'll go and I'll keep buying from them. And so it's fascinating to see. You can have the best of both worlds. You can have your bricks and mortar business, and you can have your digital business. And in some cases, you may want to over-index probably more towards the digital side, given the fact that social commerce is a multi-trillion-dollar industry globally, and it's not slowing down. I mean, you see Shopify, you look at Facebook shops, you look at some of the other players coming in. Um, it's a huge business, and I think as we get more, I suppose, satisfied in how we shop and how we get our services, we're going to expect that kind of faster checkout experience. We're going to expect to not spend more than 3-4 clicks on a site. And if you ask me for 20 questions and to go through 4 or 5 pages before I get to the checkout, you've lost me. You've lost me at hello, right? I'm already gone somewhere else because some other competitor has gotten their plumbing right and they're now ready to take my money. And so you're definitely seeing that shift. The other thing as well, which is interesting, Chris, is for some of those same business owners, there was a little bit of this kind of, I suppose, um, you know, labeling of social before the pandemic, where it was kind of like, vanity metrics. It was nice to have. We left it over there in the corner and somebody in the team dealt with it. And we didn't really kind of take it as serious, perhaps. Um, with the way things have shifted, you can see now the social conversation being right and center, and part of that real digital strategy. And it's kind of being a bit confronting, because in some cases the businesses have realized, oh shit, we spent years ignoring this. And that's probably music to the ears of many social media practitioners out there who've been trying to bang on this door for many years. And so in some cases it's like, we got to react, let's go, fantastic. In other cases, it's been a little bit of a come to Jesus moment where, okay, we now need to fix this, but what do we do? The problem with some of this is, on one hand, it's gotten the social media practitioners into the conversation, and a conversation they've been waiting for and probably in some cases really looking forward to having. But the problem is, they're having that conversation on top of a litany of demands and expectations from the business owners that just are wild. Like, if you think about it, social is probably the one part of a business where you have every single person's opinion in the business as to what you should do, but there's only really 1 or 2 people qualified in terms of actually carrying out a proper campaign on social. So these teams have been put now right in the center all overnight. The microscope has been placed on them by the business owners, and a litany of demands has been placed on their desk to go and do something with it. But they haven't been given extra resources. They haven't been given the extra budgets. They haven't been given the extra support, which has created its own level of, I suppose, anxiety and stress and potential burnout within these teams that, some businesses need to just be mindful of. And so I guess for your listenership, it's a case of, for those that are in the middle of it, you're part of the conversation. Now's your time to raise your hands and tell the businesses what you need to make it really stick. But for those business owners who maybe don't really understand what the team does, or maybe, as I think back, perhaps put them under extra pressure, it's now a chance to maybe think about, okay, what do you need from me to support you going into next year? And what are the things that maybe we didn't get so right this last 12 months that we got to put right for 2022 and beyond?
It's a really tough one as well, because I think social media in general has become, especially as a service, has become really commoditized. And as part of that, what it's ended up being is, you've got people out there offering, for $300 or for £300, I will look after your social media. And when I see these sorts of posts, I'm in quite a few sort of business owners groups and all this sort of stuff, and people asking for social media help. And I'm sat there going, if you want to have a conversation, I'm happy to talk, understand what it is you're looking for, and then I can give you an idea of what it would be. And instead, all I'm seeing is responses going, I'll look after your social media for £150, for £250, for £300. And there's this kind of commoditization, which I think even with marketing teams that understand and know that that's not the case, it's kind of been shelved into that little box. And I think this is where, especially if teams or if there's one individual in a mid-sized company, right, who's been made responsible for this, they're stuck there kind of trying to justify their value when in reality, like you said, they need the proper amount of resources. They need to be able to just take time to think. This is a really big one, right? We had this conversation with a client just a couple of days ago. We're like that. Yeah, look, I get it. We're more expensive than some packages that you'll see online. I was like that. But the honest truth is, unless I can bill you for every time I want to sit down and spend 4 hours just thinking about what we could do differently, it doesn't work. And I think this is where you lose a ton of creativity. People feel, like you said, they start to feel anxious, stressed, because people are only looking at where are the metrics, right? How much did you sell? How much are you making me for how much you cost me? And I think it's a really problematic element when that starts to be the only thing people are focusing on. Like you said, no one ends up winning. The business loses. The person who's running that is absolutely ruined because of anxiety, stress, and just feeling generally like undervalued. And I think that becomes I don't know how to explain it. It's really weird. I remember social networks when we referred to them as that when they first came out, right? So I set up my business 13 years ago. It was about a year after Facebook was sort of open to the public. And I remember people being super excited to get their business involved in these social networks. And we talk about it and they'd be excited to hear ideas and everything else. Today, I'd say probably 1 in every 10 conversations I have with a potential client ends up being price focused, and they explain to me how little Johnny, their nephew or their auntie's cousin's son's boyfriend, whatever, is really good at social media, so he can do it for 500 quid a month. So why would we use an agency? And I'm like, that you shouldn't. Have a great time. I hope it works out really well. Good luck with Johnny, and bye. Like I don't want to have this conversation, right? But these are
Yeah,
businesses that are turning over millions of pounds. These aren't
yeah,
mum and pops. We just sort of started a food truck kind of businesses and we don't know what's going to happen. This is proper business. And you're like, this isn't right. But I think there's a real underappreciation or an undervaluation of what it takes to run a social media campaign properly, what it takes to even keep up with a half decent sized brand in terms of the messages, reviewing comments, making sure you're understanding what your customers are saying, what they're looking for. I think that's a huge amount of work.
yeah. It is. It's massive, and I think that's the piece where there is a lack of appreciation for how much goes into it, but also the fact that it always tends to delineate back down to price. And there's this perception that, we can do this faster and cheaper elsewhere. And maybe you can, but just because you can do something faster and cheaper doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it tangible. It doesn't mean that your brand is going to, do better as a result of that investment. So, I think it's a case of, the idea that vanity metrics are still at play, and this obsession that companies have around trying to get something trending, or trying to get a viral campaign going, like you can't create that. Yes, you can create the conditions, or at least to try and make something work and get some chatter going, but like, social is also the place where people can smell bullshit, and they know exactly when somebody's faking it or when they're trying too hard, and they'll call it out, right? So you got to have that level of authenticity. You got to stay true to whatever your business core values are. And if you're looking at social as the lowest price denominator just to do stuff, you're going to bore your audience, and people are going to avoid you because they'll see you just don't care enough. If you're putting some horsepower behind it, it means putting money, putting attention, putting awareness, and putting resources and people in the center of it to make it run right. Like, you wouldn't skimp on your SEO SEM budget. You wouldn't skimp on your payroll budget. Like, why skimp on social? In some cases, I talk to brands, and I ask them a question. Like, it's just a bit of fun. I say, look, I might show them a price for something, and we might be going through a conversation about how we can maybe help their business. And they might be a little bit stood back on the price, or the price might feel a little bit more than what they initially thought. But in some cases, it's like, well, how much do you spend on coffee every month, right? what you mean? Well, do the maths of your staff when you're in the office. How much would you spend on coffee? Well, maybe £400 a month. Okay. And so we're fighting over £200 a month here. Like, just put into perspective, for what you get, it's not a case of it's a nice to have. Social is a must have. And if you're a brand worth any salt and you're doing something that has a monetization value, you got to put social in the middle of this. And if you don't, you can be damn sure your competitor next to you is. And they're the ones that will get your customer bleed, because they're not going to hang around and have a second class service from you if you're not willing to invest. And if the other competitor is, okay, it might be a different type of experience. It might be new for me, but I'll vote with my feet and I'll take my business elsewhere.
It's a really difficult one as well. So we talk about this a lot as there's no point in making content for content's sake. The idea of try and do something that people are actually going to want to watch, listen to, read, whatever it might be. And one of the main things that keeps coming up for us is that people will be like that, well, we're doing fine and we don't use social media. You're like, that cool. So why are we having a convo? If you want to grow and you're looking at social media as an avenue, what does that look like for you guys? But also one of the big things, and I don't know about you, but if I'm talking to someone or if I'm having a conversation with a potential company or whatever else, I will go and check out their website.
Yep.
If you get emailed by someone or if you're in an email conversation, you can find the website really easily. And then once I'm on the website, I'm like, okay, what are these people about?
Yep.
This to me is a really important step. Now, I don't know if it's just me because I work in social kind of thing, but I will go to their LinkedIn page. I'll try and see what some of the people are like that I'm dealing with. We connected on LinkedIn before this conversation. I will then
Yep.
check out the company. I'll then check out. And so many times we will go to these companies' profiles or whatever else. And, they will have set up everything. Because when the web designer sold them this great template or whatever, and it had, 8 buttons at the bottom for social media icons, they used all 8 buttons and they set up 8 channels, and then they never did anything on any of them, right? So now
Yep.
suddenly you've got this position where I'm clicking on these links and I'm going, well, this hasn't been posted since 2019, since 2020. I was like, that maybe they've gone bust. Like, genuinely, that's one of my first kind of things that will hit my mind. And I think this is something that people often forget about, right? It's great to acquire new customers. It's great to interact with existing customers or prospects, but it's also another really great way of making sure people know that you are there, who you are, that what you do, that you're still alive at this point. Because realistically, especially after 2020, a few of my favorite little places and little pizza shop and a few other people, they're not around anymore, unfortunately, which was sad and upsetting, but it's part and parcel of the world that we live in. But I think people forget that that's a great sort of social proof tool in that way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's your digital storefront. So because it's publicly facing, you can see everything. I can see how long it takes for a brand to respond back to a public Twitter comment. I can see how quick they are to resolve a problem with that shipping issue that they had yesterday. I can see how long it takes that brand to respond, and then compare it to their nearest competitor and see how fast are they responding, right? I can also see when somebody complains to a brand, that complaint goes viral, and then all of a sudden then you have your almost like micro influencing network situation where the brand is being bombarded by lots of customers feeling the same way about something. You think of airlines, you think of online retailers, like this happens all the time. And so, it's going to happen in front of you regardless of whether you're in control of it or not. The best thing is to put in place the infrastructure to allow you to put your best foot forward. And whether that's, ahead of business growth, whether it's to maintain current growth, whether it's just to kind of, innovate new products or offers or services, whatever. Ultimately, you're being evaluated on your social footprint regardless of whether you care or not. And so, yes, all customers are looking at all their channels, but equally they're making a judgment call based on the chatter around you. If somebody is disappointed and we're seeing, a trending topic of disappointment under that brand's name or that service, then people they join the conversation, and before you know it, you're in crisis management mode. But what's really interesting is, like, 91% of executives, they say they anticipate their company's social media marketing budget to increase over the next couple of years. But then of those same executives, right, 85% of them think that social data will be a primary source for business intelligence to help their company understand some of these trends and be able to actually make some decisions. So while people are saying, yeah, I see social, yeah, it's growing, yeah, I know I got to get on the bandwagon, either they don't know how to or they want to get on at a very low cost. And you can't have it both ways. Like, you're going to have to invest time, energy, and money to get this right. Or if you don't, then you're going to try and do something half-arsed. Your audience will smell it a mile away, and you will suffer. And you'll suffer in terms of either loss of revenue, loss of salience, or loss of customer loyalty. But like, it's going to bite you at some point. You might as well, you know, control it and own it now, then let it try to control you.
I think as well, though, there's probably an element of having fingers burnt over the years where, companies have tried this or they've paid a little bit of money and they've had a bad experience and, content for content's sake. Or I can still remember the big algorithm shifts on things like Facebook, where suddenly
Yep.
guys that we had helped build Facebook pages to the first couple of thousand, 4,000, 10,000 people, and then suddenly just saw their content organic reach disappeared overnight almost. And they felt like almost betrayed. And I think there's a lot of companies that still hold a bit of resentment, but not realizing that, again, one of my key things that I always talk about, we used to call them social networks. That's what they were when they were started. They're supposed to be networks. And in network, you network with people, you talk to people, you have conversations, you start conversations, you answer. And one of my favorite lines every time we talk to a new client is like that, we haven't had any engagement. People don't really do anything. And I said, oh, when's the last time you asked a question?
Yeah.
And usually at that point, you can hear everyone on the call, like you could hear a pin drop and everyone's just like, oh shit, yeah, we could have asked them for their input. Oh, that would have been good. So it's stuff like
Yeah.
that where you're just like, if you want to be social on social media, if you want to really get involved in the conversation, like you said, time, put the resources so that whoever's doing it can spend that time so that your social media team can go out there, jump onto other conversations, get involved with other brands, get involved with other people, respond to every comment, get involved with people that are actually your customers. I think it's got huge potential still to this day. And I still argue with people that say, social's dead or Facebook's only for my grandma now or whatever. Like, it's not true.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a very narrow view because ultimately we can see the trends based on age demographic as well as location. And so it's no surprise to see Gen Z and millennial, like, time in app and time on social is far higher than Gen X or baby boomers. So Gen Z, our next generation of consumers and future business leaders, they're on social twice as more as the old generations are. But then by region, Asia, LATAM, Europe, like these markets, they're spending more time consuming social now, far more than they ever have in the past, because mobile saturation is through the roof. Like, we all have our mobile devices. In some cases, desktop has skipped a generation. Like, for my daughter, she's 14. She has a laptop, but she doesn't use it. She's on her iPad and her iPhone. So here's the thing. You may be a business owner and you may be, say, Generation X or older, and you may not use social a lot, but you may be building products or services that absolutely sit within the taste buds of Generation Z. They're going to be online. They're going to be looking to be serviced online. If you're not there to service them the way they want to be met, then you're going to lose out big time. And so it's not slowing down. If anything, it's accelerating. And in some cases, it's accelerating faster than we've seen even in North America. North America typically is the first adopter of these things, and they have been for many years. LATAM, Middle East, North Africa, like, they're flying it. Like, Middle East now, every luxury brand you could think of in the Middle East has a huge social footprint. Like, they interact socially. There's no free phone numbers. There's no call centers. It's all social. And so you see that shift. And so again, just because you may not believe in the power of social doesn't mean to say your audience and consumers don't.
I often try and remind people that whoever's saying that X channel or Y channel is dead usually sells the other channel. So
Yeah.
it's so, like, I see so many of these articles out there. Email marketing is dead, and you're like that. I disagree. And I've got some friends building some pretty amazing stuff with email, and the
Yeah.
response and the results are fantastic. The same with social. It's all about what the input that you put into the machine as opposed to what you get out at the other end. Like, at the end of the day, there is no secret source. There is no, as much as people on the internet will try and fool you, there is no magic secret funnel that's going to create $1 million for you whilst you sleep. I don't buy it. I will happily invite anyone on the show that's listening to this that thinks that they can prove it to me in 30 days. I will happily get involved. But it's just not true. And I think this is where the whole industry suffers a little bit, because there are bad actors. There are people that keep pushing stuff. There's a lot of people that undervalue what really goes into social by thinking, well, I created 20 tweets for that person. That's worth 500 quid. And that's what I do. And that's social. If it works, great. If it doesn't, not my problem. And you're like, that's not really what we're trying to achieve here.
No.
But the reason why we ended up talking in the first place, or we got in touch as well, you guys have recently done a report. And I was kind of interested when I first saw this, because I thought, ooh, this could be good. So I started digging into it. But you guys have done this huge report on the idea of social media, but consumers versus the businesses that are using it. What are some of the biggest trends, or the biggest, actually, what's the biggest shock factor you got from these from this data?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's pretty expansive, so there's a lot of information in there. But some of the things that like we already knew was really, illustrating again just, consumers' willingness to buy and willingness to purchase from brands in terms of, their usage over social. So, we knew customers were already buying from through social, but seeing the increase in their perception. And so, like they're saying, 78 to 80% of people now are willing to buy from a brand after having positive engagement and positive experience on social. Like, what does that mean? It means everything from, whether resolving a question or, doing some gamification, but even just down to even looking at how they treat their other customers, seeing how fast they were to respond to queries from prior consumers, and seeing how what they stand for, like if they're public about a certain stance, whether it's something that's in pop culture or whether it's like geopolitical. When brands take a stand on something that they're really supportive of, like, yes, you're going to lose some consumers, but you're going to gain probably the ones you want to keep, right? And so they're the things again that we always knew were there, but seeing the increase in that area year over year and seeing how many customers are really bought into that, and how much of the positive prior social engagement really drives up that future returning business is pretty remarkable. And it's not slowing down. Like it's everywhere in terms of age demographic, as well as how people are feeling about the fact that I'm willing to spend more on a product or service if you delight me the way I want to be delighted in social. I'm actually willing to pay even more for it. And so not only do you get to spend, you also get a bit of a premium if you do it well. So that's pretty surprising to see. Um, Beyond that, then I think it's really a case of, looking at from the business side of things, how much time and energy is being put into just trying to figure out like where they put, where brands are starting to think about putting spend. So 23% of social marketeers are using social data to measure ROI. The 23%. That means that there's a large portion of the population of social marketeers who aren't using social data enough to be able to really prove some of the things we talked about to a business in terms of not only ROI, but also why we should continue to invest in this area. So from the brand side, that was a bit of an eye opener to see just how many companies aren't doing it yet, even though people think that social is saturated or that we've gone past the heyday of social. Not the case. If anything, we're not even halfway through this. But then equally, from a CMO perspective, social came up as the number one channel that CMOs are looking to invest time, energy, and resources in. Not SEO, not SEM, not brand, but social. So again, any of those companies that are decent size, they're looking at social as that driving engine. We knew it already, but to see that kind of stuff come through in the indexes, further compound the position.
I think that's awesome. And I think one of the most important points you mentioned there, taking a stand. And this doesn't mean, by the way, start trying to piss off as many people as you can on your social channels if you're listening. But I do think it's really important because a lot of people want to try and please everybody. So they stay so vanilla that they don't end up encouraging anybody to interact or engage with them or even to relate to them in any way. And I think that's something that is really important. I don't care if you're big, small, somewhere in between.
Yep.
You've got to stand for something. And if you've got values, if you've got your mission, vision, values, and you know what you guys stand for, make that come out. And like you said, yeah, you're going to lose some people along the way. that's fine. But the chances are the people that keep or that you gain because of that are going to buy into you doubly as hard, and they're much more likely to be raving lunatic fans, which is fantastic for the business, rather than the vanilla people that you would have lost in the middle.
Yeah. And actually, one thing on that, which is interesting, Chris, as well, is, um, you know, let's say you take a stand on something that's really dear to your company and your brand's heart, but then getting your employees to advocate for that, right? So again, in the data, it talks about like 72% of consumers feel more connected to a brand whose employees share information on social media, right? So that also shows that level of authenticity where, again, if we're changing jobs, you can go to Glassdoor, you can read all the reviews, you can hear about the CEO rating, you can read about the company culture, you can see what it's like to work for the management that are there, the pros and cons. Like it's very open. And similarly, if you're looking at a brand or you're looking at a service, if you see employees of that company speaking highly of the brand and connecting to the same core principle of whatever it is that they're feeling like they want to evangelize, that also has a compounding effect. We see it ourselves. When it comes to Pride and Pride Month, you see the brands that are behind Pride. Like that's a community of spend that is worth hundreds and hundreds of millions. If and that's only one example. Like there's so many, but like that, those communities are watching you to see, do you have a stand on it on this? And if you don't, I'm going to go to a brand that does.
Yeah, I agree completely. Okay, before we wrap up, one last thing, and this is the one I like to put you on the spot with. But
Yep.
for all the SMEs listening, what's your number one tip for them? What's the one thing that you would say, whatever happens, drop this podcast and go do X?
The one thing. um, I
Otherwise,
mean,
it'd be a 4-day podcast. Let's be honest.
yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, like, I'd say the one thing that could be really interesting would be everyone that's listening will have some level of competition. There's going to be someone else doing what they do, to some degree. Um, give yourself a social health check, right? Go ahead and pick 3 or 4 of your nearest competitors or people within your space, and go ahead and review their Facebook, review their Twitter, review their Instagram. Have a look and see, well, what are they doing today, right? And maybe just do a little bit of a health check. We actually have this on one of our blogs. It's like a social media health kit that you can download for free. Essentially, you look at your 3 or 4 competitors, look at their social channels, look at how they're using social, look at their engagement, the way they engage and how fast they engage, and then just compare it to yourself. Very, very simple. Like, do nothing else other than just do a comparison and just benchmark and have a look at it. And ask yourself the question, like, okay, am I happy with how I'm benchmarking? Yes or no? You could be ahead, you could be behind, doesn't really matter. And then is there one thing that maybe the competition are doing that you kind of felt that you'd like to emulate? Just one thing that looked good or that you felt like, oh, we could have done better there. Again, it's all publicly facing. You can see it all pretty quickly through a simple search. You don't have to be a genius or try to buy secret lists or get a third party company to go and create intel for you. You can do it yourself. Set aside an hour, hour and a half, and have a look, and just pretend you're a buyer, pretend you're in the shoes of your consumers, and what's your first impression? And be honest with yourself. Do I think the way I'm set up socially creates the right first impression for somebody to want to come to me and do business with me versus the other 3 or 4 people I'm looking at? And I think then that gives you a sense of just where you're at. What you do afterwards is up to you, but I think having that honest evaluation with yourself and your team doesn't cost anything.
It's amazing what context will do for what it is that you're actually creating. Like, it's amazing how many people, I think this is great. And you're like that, oh, how does it compare to, other blogs in that sector or whatever else? And people
Yeah,
go, what? I don't look at anyone else's. I just wrote mine.
yeah,
Okay, cool.
exactly. And here's another piece. Once you do that, if you really want to get some honest feedback, um, ask your audience. Like, ask them on a rate of 1 to 10, how would you rate us? But better still, if you go ahead and ask my 14-year-old daughter or people like that, like have them try to come through to your social, and they'll tell you pretty quickly what's broken. So
That
don't
could be
don't be afraid for
brutal.
feedback. Yeah, exactly. But at least you know. At least you know what you have to fix, right? It's better to know what's broken than not know and pretend like everything's okay, right?
Absolutely. And again, like the power of feedback is incredible, whether it's your customers, your audience, the community, your social followers, it doesn't matter. Just go
Yeah,
out there and ask. And if they don't answer you the first time, don't worry, ask them again, ask them a third
yeah,
time in a different way, but keep asking and do it fairly regularly, right? Because
yeah.
times are
Changes.
changing, trends are changing, everyone's changing, the way we consume is changing. So always worth having those sort of conversations and keeping them as open, as honest as possible, especially with yourself. I think that's the key thing. And I know that's the hardest part. Trust me, we all do.
Yeah, definitely.
Jared, this has been absolutely awesome. Before we wrap up, then now, where can people find you and how can people connect with yourself or obviously with Sprout Social as well?
Yeah, so listen, we've got a fairly extensive website, so sproutsocial.com. You can go in there and you can look at our blogs. We've got a ton of thought leadership, a ton of insights and tools and kits that people can use and read. We've got some mentions from different brands in terms of what they're doing, as well as us curating information about brands that we admire or things that they're doing really well in the world of social. So definitely check that out. It's all free. It's all information there. If you're curious and you want to play with our tool, we offer a 30-day free trial. Again, you can go through the website, you can download our platform, and you can play with it yourself for 30 days and see what you think. And then besides that, then, I'm on LinkedIn and on Twitter. If you have any other questions or if anyone wants to reach out for more conversations, happy to put in touch with the members of the team.
So, not on the shadows on TikTok.
No, I mean, you can Snapchat me, but I mightn't respond.
Jared, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Pleasure.